Hey guys, welcome to yet another episode. Today we are going to be talking about the best setting for the Sonos Arc. And this is paired with a pair of Sonos Sub as well as a pair of Sonos Fives for the surrounds. This is an update to the video that I've made almost a year back, 9-10 months ago, which I talked about the Sonos Arc's best setting when it's paired with a Sub Gen 3. So a couple of things has happened since. So let's take a look at what changes have been made and how it affects the best settings. So, like all my videos, I like to tell you the conclusion up front. So here is the summary for the best setting. Listen to this, and if you are pressed for time, just take these settings, go with it, and you'll be fine. If you want to stay around, please, I encourage you to. I will walk through the settings with you, show you the frequency response chart that comes about when you apply those settings so that you can learn what these settings mean to you, because your room is different from mine. So if you learn how it affects your setup, how it affects the listening, then you'll be able to make adjustments from the base settings that I'm going to be putting up here as a summary. So True Play, I will leave it on. Bass, I set it to -2. On the same EQ page, treble is set to +3. Loudness is left on. Night sound, I turn it off. Speech enhancement, I turn it off as well. Sub level is set to -4. Phase, I kept it at 0. Surround levels, I kept it at 0 for the purpose of this video. And height level, this is a new setting that's enabled by Sonos. Height level, I set it to +4. So there you go, that's my recommended setting in 2021. Now it's May, all right, for the Sonos Arc, when it's paired with a pair of the Sonos Sub as well as a pair of the Sonos Fives as the surround speaker. Now, if you have some time, do stay on. I will go through with you how these changes, how these settings actually affect the sound profile. So you can learn something from there and you'll be better equipped to make those changes on your own to see how it fits into your listening preference. So there are a couple of new things that has happened since I made the last video. If you're interested in the last video, do check out my channel. It is posted about 9 months ago. I'm going to put the link somewhere here, I guess, or here maybe. Yep. And they have implemented dual sub support, so you can now pair a pair of sub as long as one of them is a Sub Gen 3 in your system, so you can run dual sub setup. You can now adjust the height channel, right? So the Sonos Arc, they have upward firing channel for the Atmos sound effects, so you can now increase the effect to arbitrary scale but +10, or reduce it to -10. I don't know why anybody wants to reduce it, but yeah, you can reduce it to -10. And the last thing that, actually not the last, in fact, they actually made a lot of changes to the DSP, the digital sound processing profile on the Sonos Arc. Initially, when it was launched, there was a lot of sibilance, a lot of treble issues at the high end, making the Arc sound very tinny and metallic sounding. And there was also a bass issue, which they have since corrected it. So since I've done the video, a lot of things have changed. So the previous recommended settings would have been superseded by this video. But again, the last video I made, I didn't test it with the surround. This time around, I'm just setting it up with the Sonos Fives as a surround and a pair of Sub Gen 3. So stay on. I will be pulling out some of the frequency response sweep that I've done to walk you through to the settings and teaching you a little bit about how to make some of these changes and the kind of effects that it will have on your sound. Okay, so let's pull up the first curve. What you have here is a frequency response curve. Now, how to read this is that I've removed all the scale. So I just thought that maybe this format might be a little bit easier to understand instead of all the numbers and all the grid lines and all. So at this point here is the response of the system at 20 Hertz. And then it goes up all the way. Maybe about this point is about 100 Hertz. At about this point is about 1000 Hertz, which is 1 kilohertz. It hits 10,000 Hertz here, which is 10 kilohertz, and it tails off all the way to the far end at 20 kilohertz. So this is the frequency response. Now, ideally, in a proper system that you want to tune, you want this curve to be as flat as possible. Flat meaning the sound is accurate and every note, okay, because when I measure this, they play all the notes from 20 Hertz all the way to 20 kilohertz. okay? And it plays it should be at the same volume, same level. But because of whatever constraints you have around the room, the reflection, the wall bounce, the speaker itself, the amp itself, there are many, many things that can change, including the DSP on the Sonos Arc that will change the profile. So this curve that I am loading up here, this red curve, which is highlighted by the yellow, is what you will get stock out of the Sonos Arc. That means to say, I've turned off everything. I've done no settings. So loudness is actually turned on by default by Sonos, but I have actually turned it off in this particular case. So you will see that with two subs, this range below 100 Hertz is actually very, very pronounced, all right? And it tails off when it hits about 200, 300 Hertz here, and to 400 and 500 Hertz, you see a bump here, all right? So this bump is not that desirable. So you look at this whole curve, is bass heavy and definitely not as flat as you want it to be. Okay, so Sonos, they have TruePlay, right? And what TruePlay does is that it plays a series of tones through the Sonos Arc, through your whole system. It uses your phone's mic, your iPhone's mic, to actually measure those sounds and map it according to what the Sonos engineers think that it should sound like, okay? Now, it's still going to be biased a little bit. I don't think they are aiming for flat. Companies like Sonos, they want an exciting sound, not so much an accurate and a flat sound. But if I were to advise you, I would say try to go for flat as much as possible. There's a part in the video where I tell you how a flat sound can still sound good, but let's wait for that, okay? Okay, so in this green curve here, this is the Sonos Arc when TruePlay has been done. So you see what TruePlay has done, right? TruePlay has tried to flatten the curve out just a little bit. This hum at below 100 Hertz, okay, it has been pulled down significantly by TruePlay. And if you look at this hum here, the hum that is about 500 Hertz plus minus, okay, it has also been pulled down a little bit, and TruePlay has piped the treble a little bit, extended it a little bit further, all right? But overall, you'll see that the curve is slightly flatter than the stock curve where TruePlay was not done. So what TruePlay did was actually to measure my room and see how the sound is bouncing, and it actually tries to compensate. It tries to process the sound to fit your room to something which the Sonos engineers think that, hey, this is what you should be hearing, okay? So for the purpose of this test, what I have done is that I am actually performing TruePlay first, okay? So if you have not done TruePlay, if you are on Android and have no means to access TruePlay, that's fine, okay? I have done and applied all the settings after TruePlay was done, okay? So I've done the TruePlay, and this particular curve here that you see, this blue, I think, yep, blue, which I'm highlighting in yellow now, you will see that it has flattened out the curve considerably, right? So now the whole curve is almost kind of flat, except that with a dual sub, okay, you can't really run away from this. Now, let me just try to step through a little bit on what has changed, okay, the settings that I've recommended, which I'm going to be posting here, which I have posted here, so that you can refer to it easily, okay? I've set a base of -2. Now, what a base of -2 does is that it pulls down this curve right from here, this point here. So this particular point here is about 200 to 300 Hertz or so. And base response is being pulled down, okay? Now, I have a sub setting, which the sub level has been set to -4, but sub setting starts kicking in at only about 100 Hertz or so. That's the crossover point thereabouts of the sub. So any effect that you make to any change that you make to the sub setting will only start affecting the curve at below 100 Hertz. Anything that you start changing to the base setting, it actually starts affecting at about 200 or 300 Hertz thereabout, and it starts bringing it down. So the -2 was to bring down the overall curve from this green curve a little bit lower down, okay? And then the sub -4 was to actually move this particular bit here from 100 Hertz or so a little bit further down, okay? So that the whole thing, this section here, the lower frequencies, is more or less in line with the rest of the frequency response. So treble +3. Now, what does treble plus 3? Treble plus 3 at this particular point here, this is about 3 kilohertz or so. At 3 kilohertz onwards, it has actually pulled up the treble slightly. Okay, unfortunately, the extension is not quite reached, so I believe that more power is being directed to these frequency ranges, which means the upper frequencies will be slightly neglected. Okay, but overall, you'll see that this part has been boosted slightly, okay, and this part has been pulled down considerably. So that's what the EQ settings do. Now, at this point in time, loudness is still turned off. I have to talk about the loudness setting. Loudness, what it does is that it will boost the lower frequencies and it will boost the higher frequencies, okay, but only to a certain extent and only at slightly lower volumes. If you pump your system volume high enough, loudness actually won't make much of a difference. So loudness is kind of like a very quick boost to the lower end and the upper end if you are playing at moderate levels. If your volume is already high, loudness actually doesn't make any difference at all. So night sound and the speech enhancement, these are the two things that I have always kind of left off. I think speech enhancement doesn't really enhance the speech, and night sound is only when you're listening to it late at night and you don't want to be disturbing everybody. So it actually compresses the dynamic range of the whole sound profile. So your explosions will sound very much softer, your soft sounds will appear to you to be louder. So everything sounds very flat and bland. Okay, it's not something that I would recommend for critical listening, but in a pinch, if you really don't want to be disturbing anybody in the household or your neighbors late at night, then maybe you can try that, but not for sound improvement. Now, sub-level, I've explained it to you earlier when I was talking about the bass. It actually brings down this peak here, which is below the 100 Hertz range. Okay, so for the purpose of this video, I'm actually using Sonos Fives as the surround. I don't think everybody will have access to using a Sonos Fives for the surround. I've left that setting to 0, so I don't play around with that too much. It really depends on the setup that you have. Inside the surround setting, you can set the surround plus minus for music or for movies/TV, and you can set the distance that it is away from your sitting position, but otherwise it shouldn't affect the sound profile much. Now, the last setting here, the height setting. Now, this is one of the most interesting setting because it is new, right? And it was just introduced just barely 10 days ago. And Sonos has now allowed us to change the levels of the heights channel that is coming out from the Sonos Arc. When you think about it, it is like trying to change the levels of the surround, right? But you don't need, this is independent of whatever surrounds that you're using. The heights channel is already built into the Sonos Arc, so you can definitely change it. So when you move the heights channel upwards, okay, it is going to raise the ceiling effect, the atmos effect, the heights effect. And if you apply a negative value, it's supposed to pull that back. So technically, it should not affect this curve at all, right? But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, this heights channel is being implemented by Sonos to bump up the higher frequencies. The higher has been about 4 kilohertz plus minus. And when they actually do that, it increases the bump here slightly. Okay, so when you do a +4 to the heights, this actually moves up. So this is psychoacoustics at work, right? It uses those frequencies and it casts them upwards, and those are easier reflected, okay, and you can hear them, so it gives you a better impression of sound that is coming from the ceiling because they are boosting that frequency range. So not only the volume of the heights channel is being boosted, the overall profile of your sound curve is also going to get piped up a little bit at this range of about 4 kilohertz, and that's for the heights channel. Okay, so now I'm going to remove the green curve so that it's easier to take a look. So you have the red curve, which is before my recommended setting. This is complete stock form from Sonos. And then you have this blue curve, which is following my recommended settings here. If you follow my whole recommended settings, you get this relatively flat response curve, which a lot of audiophiles would like. There's a slight dip here, there's a slight bump here. Well, it makes the sound a little bit more interesting, but I know what you're thinking, right? You're thinking, hey, you are basically just lopping this whole section off, right? You're losing this much response all the way from about 250 hertz here. You're just cutting everything down. And even at this range, you are bumping up artificially. Well, this artificial bump is really for the heights channel. It is at +4. You could actually make it even higher if you raise the heights channel setting any higher than +4. But let's ignore that for now. But how do you get the bass performance back? Now, bear in mind, I have a pair of subs, 2 Sonos subs, hooked up to the Sonos Arc here. So why am I bringing down the performance of the bass? So this is how psychoacoustics works. This is how sound works and is independent regardless of whether you're on a Sonos system or any other system, right? You want to achieve it flat, right? So that what you're hearing is as intended by the recording artist, by the studio who is engineering that mix. So you don't hear more bass than necessary, and you don't hear more highs than necessary, or you don't get any less than what you're supposed to be hearing. But how do you solve this problem? How do I actually then get this thing back to the original bass levels that I had before the tuning? So Peter, are you actually recommending that we tune down the performance of the system? Actually, not that. Okay, so this is what you do. In order to get this back up to this level, okay, what you do is you increase the volume, all right? Because at this point in time, your whole sound is flat and it's going to sound like it has less energy because you have tuned it all the way down, all right? But in order to get it back up, you tune the volume up, okay? In this particular case, I'm going to recommend about a 25-30% increase in volume on top of your bass volume. So let's say you are at 50% point, you just add in another 12 to 15 percentage points there. So that's about 25% of your original bass volume that, say, you were getting this rate curve from. So in order to reach the levels of bass that was produced at volume 50, you raise the volume to volume 65, for example. And this is what happens when you do exactly that. Okay? You see this orange curve here. This orange curve is after I have raised the volume of the system to 65%, right? So now the system is sounding as loud as it would have been at the bass region when it's at 50% volume. Okay, so now this part is around the same level, and then for the rest of the curve, if you look at how it works now, the entire frequency band has been lifted. So you just imagine, right? You're getting the same amount of bass, but the rest of the frequency spectrum has been lifted to actually enhance the listening pleasure, the performance of the whole system. If you look at the real far end where the whole 10 kilohertz onwards is, everything it gets pumped up significantly. This increase is not trivial. It is significant, all right? And you are getting a relatively flat curve all throughout, okay? So a lot of people miss this point. They think that tuning the whole system, setting EQ on the whole system, even reducing it, it makes the whole system perform below its intended standards. That is not the case, okay? After you do the tuning, you may have to increase your volume. You likely have to increase your volume. But what you are getting at the end of the day is a flat frequency response curve, which is performing as it should. And whatever you're hearing from the system is what the studio intended for you to hear. So I hope you have learned something new from this today. Let me know if you like this format. I know there are no numbers here, no grid lines, no frequency, but I'm just talking you through. I hope that this is slightly clearer because I'm able to articulate this whole curve slightly better. And if you have enjoyed today's video, I have here a Patreon account. This is a QR code that actually, if you scan, you will pop up a link and the link goes to my Patreon account. You can actually make a small contribution towards my coffee fund. I drink all kinds of coffee, but mostly cheap local coffee. So it's just, even then, that coffee is just like $1. So even if you don't make any contributions, I welcome you to this channel. I am very, very happy to make all these tests and share the results with you, share my learnings with you. Now, this particular test was actually very, very difficult to execute, all right? I'm going to pull up the charts again. So if you look at this chart here, to get from this curve to this curve, I did so many testings. Now, Sonos has a lot of different settings now, right? They have true play on, off, you have bass settings, you have treble setting, you have the loudness setting, you have the night sound, speech enhancement, you have the sub level. The sub level, you can set the phase, you can set the surround level, you can now add in the height adjustment as well. So there are many, many variations. And for each of them, after I do it, I have to actually use my UMic, use the REW software to measure the frequency response, measure all these curves. And it was after so many hundreds of combinations and measurements that I took. And bear in mind, each time I measure, I actually do at least 3 or maybe 4 or 5 measurements for each one, just to average them out to get the most accurate result. It was time consuming. I hope you have found some value in today's video, and I hope these recommended settings work for you. If they do work for you, do drop a comment in the video comment section below and help everybody out. Now, these are starting points, okay? It doesn't mean that you will use this and it will work for you, okay? But I hope I've stepped through the reasoning behind applying any of these settings so that you are more equipped to make some of these changes on your own. Any questions, drop them in the comment section below, and I'll see you in my next video.